Hey everybody, this is Rashmi from Designhill, your host for the day. I hope you and your families are doing well and staying safe in these difficult times. I would like to welcome you to this AMA session wherein we are going to talk about community building for business growth. The event is brought to you by Designhill, which is the world's leading creative marketplace for businesses and individuals alike to source high quality designs and buy unique products created by independent artists. Let me introduce, without wasting any further time, let me introduce our speaker for today. We have Richard Millington. He is the founder of FeverBee and an author of both Buzzing Communities and the Indispensable Community. Over the past 13 years, Richard has been helping and developed 270 plus successful communities, including those for Apple, Facebook, Google, the World Bank, SAP, Amazon, and many more. Thank you so much, Richard, for taking out a time from your busy schedule and joining us. Please say a quick hi to the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. Wow, that video was quite dramatic, huh? Like, dum, 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 getting into that. Yeah, awesome.
You liked it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot more exciting than most of the sessions I do. That was great.
That's pretty great to hear. All right. So let's get started. Before we start the session, let's quickly look at what Designhill is all about, and then we'll quickly begin with the session.
Looking to get your boss to remember your name? Head to the world's #1 creative marketplace, Designhill.
When my company promoted me to head up our latest real estate development project, I was excited, then anxious, then petrified. How was I going to hire the team, get the designs completed, and design beautiful presentation materials on our lean budget while impressing my bosses, some of whom are still learning my name?
Good job, Mitch.
My name's Lawrence. That's why I went to Designhill and got the design help I needed that fit within my company's brand guidelines. The process was simple. Designhill's design contest ensured I'd get a ton of results I'd love. Start by picking a number of designs that inspire you. This one's good, and that one. This one speaks to me. Then share some information about the project. Lastly, pick a package that fits your budget. Do you just want a logo, or do you want it all? Then, boom. I got more than 60 custom design options to choose from, as well as all the other graphic design assets I wanted. And it's all backed by Designhill's 100% money-back guarantee. If I don't find a design I like, I get my money back. You can't lose. Now I have what I need to make a splash in my meetings, with everything from business cards, pamphlets, posters, and more. It's real.
Let the world know it's real and build your brand with Designhill.
All right, that was about Designhill, and now we are all set to start the session. We'll also take up questions during the session, so please, if you have any questions, put them in the questions tab in your screen. So Richard, let's get started, and let me start with a very basic question that people have around community management, which is why is it very important to have a community in place, and how does it help businesses?
Sure. So I think what a community does, which is a really incredible thing, that it takes all of the expertise of your customers and your audience, it takes the knowledge of your audience, it takes the experiences of your audience, and lets you harness that into a valuable resource for your organization. So it's a lot easier for your customers to help one another than for you to step in and do that every interaction at a time. It's a lot easier, and it reduces your support costs if your customers are resolving each other's questions. You get a lot of better expertise if your customers are creating their user guides, their knowledge bases, all those things for you. And also when you connect your members together, you build this incredible sense of loyalty around your organization. And that's what's going to lead to people advocating on your behalf. That's what's going to lead to your members being more loyal customers to you. And that's what's going to lead them doing things like leaving great reviews for you or doing whatever they can to help you out. So that's why you should create a community. And even if you don't have an organization, just having a community around you is such an amazing asset to have. Whenever you want advice, what vendors to use or how much to pay for something, whatever it is in your life, in your professional life at all, having a community around you, I found time and time again, is absolutely indispensable.
Wonderful. Also, Richard, I have seen a lot of times that, a lot of businesses or people say around us that, community is meant for a certain business or certain industries. Is it so? Or if it is the case, which companies or which kind of industries or, which kind of brands does the community help the most?
I think there's some industries like technology with, SaaS companies where they need a lot of support, those kind of things. Yeah, I think in technology, most big technology companies today pretty much do have an online community. But I don't think that's anywhere close to the limit. I've seen communities for, music artists and groups, to movies, to pretty much any sector at all. I think what matters is not what industry you work in, but what is the value that your community can provide to your audience. So for example, it's very hard. Let's imagine you sell, say, washing machines. This is a topic that people aren't going to want to spend a lot of their spare time talking about their washing machine. They might really like it, but we're busy. We don't want to spend our spare time talking about it. But you could build a community about, say, household DIY hacks, and you could have a far bigger community that's far more relevant to your audience than one just about washing machines. So I think the challenge for almost every kind of organization isn't figuring out, are we in the industry that we can and can't build a community for? It's in looking through the eyes of your audience, really getting close to them at the day-to-day level, and then finding out exactly what they need and building a community around that. That means the community might not necessarily be about you. It always has to be about your audience, but you can still play a fundamental role in that and harness the real benefits of that community. Even if it isn't entirely about your product or your services, it's still a community filled with the most passionate people in your topic that you control.
Okay, and now let's get into the root of it. An individual or a business who have never done community before and would want to incorporate this community into their business. How should one go about it? How should one build community from scratch? And what are the initial steps that are very, very important to be considered and to be taken care of?
Yeah, this is a huge topic, and I can talk for hours about it. But let's talk about some of the fundamental things. Like if you want to start a community, the first thing I would do is start really, really small. Reach out to maybe 5 to 20 customers or fans or acquaintances that you have and connect them in some sort of group. That can be Slack, that can be WhatsApp, that can be Facebook, that can be another platform that you choose. But see if you can just start some discussions taking place there. See if there's a passion for that topic. See if that topic begins to, or that group begins to take off by itself, or whether every single day you have to go in there and generate that activity and create those discussions. Because if you have to do all the work, that usually means you haven't quite nailed what that topic has to be yet. So first start with a really small group, really small, 20 people or however many makes sense to you, and then expand gradually from that. Start having more discussions. Start seeing if you can collaborate together on a guide or some sort of resource, and then start looking at what the next step of that looks like. So for example, you might then start to think about, well, maybe we need a separate platform for this, maybe a forum, maybe one of the more premium platforms that are out there. We might start looking at whether you need to have some sort of full-time manager or not. You might start looking at whether you need a even bigger sense of content system to create regular blog posts and emails and resources. But the fundamental thing, there's a huge plane flying right overhead, I'm sorry about that. But the fundamental thing is that you start small and grow steadily from there. There's a lot of advice to, once you are big, but when you're just getting started, really go at the micro level, really go at the one-to-one level, engage with each member individually. When someone joins, you can invite them to the group, you can introduce them to the other members of the group, and that doesn't scale forever. But once you get to 100 members or 200 members or so, it begins to start taking off by itself, but you have to start small to begin with.
Okay, one of the important points that you have mentioned over here is deciding on the platform. It could be Slack, it could be a WhatsApp, or it could be a Facebook group, and then starting small. So I think one of the major challenge that people face is that they are not able to identify which platform to choose. They are not sure like how to start. So what would you suggest to people on that front, that how should they go about choosing a right platform for their community?
Yeah, so I think at the lower level, like I would talk to your audience, find out what platforms they use best, and usually use that platform just to get started. So usually, if you're working with, say, developers, that's usually Slack or Telegram or something along those kinds of lines. Crypto is mostly like Telegram at this point. If you're working with more casual people, then it might be Facebook groups. But pick the platform that your audience most uses. Then as you begin to grow, you can start thinking about a forum-based platform. And then you're looking at tools like Vanilla and Discourse and those kind of tools that are out there. And then if your platform goes or your community grows to a really big size, if you've got a budget to invest in it, then you can start looking at one of the huge platforms that are out there that offer you everything that you need to do. So platforms like Salesforce Community Cloud, platforms like Chorus, platforms like Insided. There's a lot of options that you have out there. But just initially, just start with something really simple. Even just say a simple email list. If that works for you, then go with that. But begin with something that your audience knows how to use, and really try and make sure it's a platform that is that's within the flow of what your audience does today. It's really hard to get people into the habit of visiting an entirely new platform. So begin with something that is in the flow of what your members currently use today.
That's great. Also, Richard, you mentioned about starting small. I think it's very hard to get those first 100 people in the community or first 1,000 people in the community, and also to make sure that those 100 or 1,000 people are participating and engaging. So what would you suggest? What strategies should people follow to at least get those initial members, 100, 200, 300 members in the community? Whether they should approach their community member through social media, they should run ads, they should use referrals, like what methods they should use to invite those initial members in the group?
Yes, there's all sorts of different channels you can use. A lot of the work is done before you actually start the group. So it depends, what kind of community you're building. But very often, if it's a community for yourself or for your first audience, one of the things you might want to be thinking about is building those relationships before you intend to start the community. So it's very hard to start a community if you've got no connections at the moment. If you don't have a mailing list, if you don't have a following on social media, no one knows who you are, it's very difficult to get the community up and running. So the first step is to build that list, build that credibility, build the audience to begin with. That usually means creating content for that audience. That usually means hosting events for that audience. That usually means reaching out and having dozens of individual interactions with that audience on social media channels or Instagram or anything that's out there today. Just participating at the events. Once we start having events again in this world, start participating in all these events that are out there. Once you have an audience, and even if you can't do that, then you can start looking out to people that are interested in that topic outside of that. So you might start looking at people that are discussing relevant terms on Twitter, or joining other Facebook groups in other communities, reaching out to them individually and getting their feedback on the idea. One of the easiest ways to guarantee that someone will participate in a community is get them involved at the very early stage in coming up with the idea for the community and refining that topic and making sure that they feel they have a very strong sense of ownership in that topic. Because when you do these things, they're far more motivated to participate. So what you generally want to do to start with is make sure you've got as many people involved in creating that community, refining the idea, make sure you're really getting that concept exactly to what they need. And then you can invite them to participate in the discussions, the activities, and the events that they've already told you they want to participate in. And then over the long term, you can start having regular discussions. You can mention those people to participate in those conversations. There's a lot you can do to get people engaged once you've got over that initial hump. But fundamentally, find out the kinds of activities that people want to participate in, host them in your community, and then invite those people to participate in those activities within your community.
All right. So let me quickly jump over to the questions tab and see if we have any question. So I see this question by Siddhanshu. It's in the chat and he's asking, what is the meaning of FeverBee? So he want to know more about you.
So FeverBee is just a name that came like 13 years ago. I wanted to create an organization that had like a very distinct brand name, and you need like the URL that is available at the time. And I like the idea of combining two different animals or creatures or things together. And I think I went through like Fever Frog, Fever Island, Fever Link, and FeverBee was just the one that my wife liked. So yeah, I went with that. It does kind of relate to like generating bars and that kind of thing, and a fever and all those kind of things. But yeah, it doesn't have too much of a meaning besides that. It's just something that stood out that people tend to remember. So yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. I hope, Sudhanshu, you got the answer of your question. Okay, let me see more. Nathalia has asked this question, and I think a lot more people would have this question because it is related to monetization. So she is saying that how do I monetize the visibility that I'm going to generate with my community?
Yeah, it's a good question. So if you're working for an organization, that usually isn't the kind of thing that an organization would do, because they get value from a community through loyalty, retention, so they don't try to monetize that community in a direct way. But you know, a lot of communities do it in different ways. They charge for membership of that community. That's okay. It can work if it's exclusive, if there's high value, if someone else can't simply just replicate it for free outside of it. And there's definitely, a great result from that. Another thing is to sell advertising within that community. There's a lot of ad networks and sponsorships that are available out there. If you figure out what companies are promoting and advertising in your space, that's usually a pretty good route to go with. Once you've got maybe more than a few thousand people in that community, that's a pretty good route to go with. The most successful thing I've found ever for monetizing a community is to find things that your members want to buy. Like, it's very easy to try and find customers for your organization or the products that you're selling. It's a different thing entirely to find like products for your customers or your audience. So for example, there are so many organizations that have sold things that you're like, wow, that really sold. So for example, I've sold books to my audience. I figure out exactly the kind of books that they want, and then I sell that book. I've had organizations in chat rooms that sell like bots that hold the name for you. You know, some organizations sell verified accounts and Twitter's valuable things, but there's often very unique things that are quite scarce within a community. And if you can figure out what those things are to do with reputation or having a unique sense of ability to do things other members can't do, those are typically the things that sell best to that audience. There's no simple answer to that, but at the bottom level, you can charge people to be members. Level above that, you can sell advertising to your members. And the level above that is to sell things that you create to your audience. You know, there's a great community called Threadless, where they have a design competition every week in that community. They print the winning designs. Then you sell those t-shirts with those designs directly to the people that voted on that as the best answer. So there's always things that you can sell. It's about figuring out what the scarce thing is. What is going to be the really valuable thing for your audience? And sometimes the easiest way to find that out is just to ask them.
All right. All right. So I see one more question by Lady. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. But I'm afraid that since it's not in English, I don't really understand that. So we would love to answer your question. It would be great if you can put that in English, and we would love to take that up. So Richard, I have a lot more questions in my list for you. So okay, moving forward, so we talked about monetizing. We talked about having the first 100 members. Now let's talk about the growth. What are the factors that are important for growing the community, and what strategies people can adapt to grow their community from 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 members.
Yeah, absolutely. So initially, most of the people that join a community will be people that have had a direct interaction with you, or people that are on your mailing list at the moment. That usually gets you, depending on the size of your audience today, they'll get you to 100 to 1,000 people in your community. And you can anticipate maybe 1 in 100 or maybe 5 in 100, somewhere like 1 to 5% of your audience might join your community. To get beyond that, you've got to find a continual source of traffic. This is like turning on the tap for your community. So here you've got to think about things. Where are your members going to come from? Where are newcomers going to come from? And the common channels are existing traffic from some sort of existing website. So if you have a website at the moment and you can put a community tab on there, that usually drives a fair number of people to that community. The second one, and by far the most powerful, is search traffic. The longer a community has been around, the more likely it is to appear in search results. And after around, I don't know how long, but around like 9 to 12 months or so, most of the people that visit your community will come by a search. And this is really interesting because you can start optimizing your community for search. You can start thinking about how you change the subject lines and all those kind of things to get more traffic. But this doesn't work for channels like Slack. It doesn't work for Facebook groups, and we'll come to that in just a second. So you might want to consider what kind of platform you're using. Slack is great, but it doesn't recommend other people to join their groups. Whereas Facebook groups, if you start a group there, it starts growing in popularity. The algorithm of Facebook will show that group to other people that might be interested, and there's a natural flow of more and more people joining that community. And so I would start increasingly looking at every single channel where people can join that community and start driving people towards it. Here you might also start reaching out to other potential partners in the same space that you're in, seeing if they can link to your community. You might invite a top influencer within your space to do an interview and then have them send the link and their traffic to your community. You start increasingly look at where your potential audience is. Where do they spend their time? And making sure that you're building relationships and collaborating with each one of these individuals and driving more and more of them to your community. That's how you have a source of growth in the community that grows and grows over a long period of time. That's how you make sure you don't just have an initial spike of activity that then collapses, but it continues growing over the long term. And that's what we want here. We want growth that is sustained, slow, and steady for your community.
All right. Now let's talk about the resources that people or businesses would need to have a community in place. Unlike having 5 community managers at once at the beginning of the community, of course, won't make sense, right? So how should people go about making the wise decision of allocating a good amount of resources in place, which is apt, not too much and not too less? So how should that calculation should be done by the businesses or brands?
In an ideal world, we would create a strategy for the organization and we would say we need this number of resources, and then we go forward with that. What I've seen happen far more often is that there's a limited number of resources to begin with, and you have to work within those boundaries that you have at the moment. And that resource, it varies, but for most organizations to begin with, it's usually one person managing that community. It might be a little different for a very large organization. They might have a team of 3 to 5, but generally it's just one person that's responsible for getting that community up and running, working pretty much full-time. Any less than full-time can be quite difficult. I'd be a little bit more nervous about taking on a project like that. But for an organization, having one person full-time can usually get activity going. It can usually get people engaged and participating, welcoming newcomers to that community, and expand from there. Budget-wise, it depends on the platform. Larger organizations usually begin with a budget of between, it varies, like 250 to around 500,000 US, but that's at the very higher range. Most organizations will probably begin at around $10,000 to $70,000, having a simple platform to get up and running, hiring someone to run that community full-time. That's the kind of budget they tend to work with. If you're just doing this for yourself, or bringing your colleagues together, or it's a project that's just a passion for you, then it's a very different thing. You can often do this in your spare time. You don't need everyone to be super engaged all the time. You can just have people drifting in when they need it, when they need to use it. So here you might want just to devote a few hours a week, and that can usually get a community that is always there and available for people that need it, but it doesn't have to be the super active hub of activity all the time. And then in terms of budgets, you don't need too much to use Slack or Facebook groups. A few $100s possibly, but even then you can do it a lot cheaper than that. So it depends on the level. At the very basic level, if it's just you and some colleagues up to around 100 members or so, a few $100s is usually all you need. Beyond that, you're probably looking at around 10 to 50,000, 70,000, something like that. And then you have the very high end, which is 250, 500, 750,000.
All right. Now I think the next question that I have is a really important question for the session, which a lot of times people often miss this part, which is about measuring the performance and measuring the ROI from your community. So how should how should businesses or individuals who are people have invested their resources, their time, as you suggested that either they have chosen for Slack or a particular forum to build a community on, after so much of efforts and hard work, how should they measure the outcome and the results that they are getting from the community? How can that ROI can be measured in terms of numbers?
Sure. So again, huge topic. We can spend hours discussing this. But if you go to feverbee.com/ROI, I've done a whole piece on this. I explain some methodology and all those kind of things. So I don't want to go too deep into that, but let me just point out a couple of things here that are really important. Before you even think about measuring the return on investment, think about why you're measuring the return on investment. Like, what are you hoping to achieve? Are you measuring the return on investment because you want more resources? Are you measuring the return on investment because you want to know whether you should kill the community or not? And what will you do differently if it's higher or lower than what it used to be? What does good look like? What does bad look like? Before you even begin figuring out how to measure it, you should think about what you're going to do with that information. Because far too often we do these really complicated procedures, we get the data, and then honestly, we don't know what to do with this data at all. So for example, if you just want more resources for the community, from your organization, ROI helps, but having that internal narrative and a story that you can tell that is supported by data and building those relationships is far more effective. So you're going to figure out the right tool for the job. When it comes to actually measuring specific things, again, you have to be very clear what results you were expecting from the community. Are you measuring the reduced cost of calls that you're getting? Are you measuring customer loyalty and retention? There's different ways of doing that. Are you measuring advocacy? Are you measuring just a pure level of engagement? There's so many different things that you can be measuring here. One thing I would be very aware of is not to fall into this engagement trap. This is the idea where you're trying to generate as much engagement as possible to show the community is really successful. Because at some point, someone will question, what is the value of all this engagement? And often it's very hard to show that there is any value at all. Often, a lot of the most successful communities aren't those with the most engagement, but those that are getting their members to do the most valuable things. So I know an organization called QuickBase, for example. What they managed to do was get a relatively small number of their members to leave reviews on the software code comparison sites that are out there, and that made them #1 in their category. That generated millions of dollars in sales from being the #1 in that category. But they only needed a few dozen members to do that. If they had just been measuring the level of engagement, they would have got entirely a different result, and they would have been aligning all their actions to the wrong result. So what are you hoping to achieve? And do you need a lot of engagement to achieve that? So if you get your members leaving reviews and testimonials, that can be really valuable to you, but doesn't need a huge amount of engagement. If you're looking for call deflection, then you can measure how many calls you're getting at the moment. You can measure the cost per call. You can measure how many people are getting answers via the community. If you're measuring things like the impact it has on members, you can look at metrics like the quality of life score. You can look at the sense of community index and see if the community is having a big impact upon the lives of your members. If you're measuring advocacy, for example, you can do a comparison of members in the community compared to outside of the community and the level of comparative advocacy in that sense. But there are so many different ways to measure each different thing. So what I would do is first really figure out what are the results you're hoping to see. And very often these results aren't what you might think. One of the most powerful reasons to build a community is to get great feedback from your audience, to find out exactly what your audience needs and wants, what products do they need, what services do they want you to develop. And all this kind of feedback, you can't really measure the ROI of it in a specific sense, but you know it's really valuable to you. So you can look at how many ideas have been implemented or introduced, or those kinds of things. But really figure out what is the goal to begin with, what are you going to do with that data when you do get it, and then start figuring out what methodology you need. Far too often we dive straight into that methodology side. We need to take a step back and really figure out what is the goal of that community, what are we going to do with that data first? Because once you've figured that out, everything else becomes a lot easier.
So with that answer, Richard, honestly, you have dropped some great value bombs for the live audience here, and I would highly, just would like to know, would like to let the audience know that if you want to go deep dive into it, and if you want to build your own community from scratch, I would highly recommend the book written by Richard, which is the Buzzing Community. So definitely go and read that out. And I'm pretty sure that I personally love that book a lot, and I'm pretty sure that it's very everything that is mentioned over there is very crystalline clear. So go check that out and read that, and I'm sure it is going to help. On that note, I hope you are enjoying the session. Before we move forward, I would like to give a quick shout out to Designhill for organizing this event. Let's take a quick break and keep this interesting conversation going on. Stay tuned, and we will be back to hear more from Richard Millington.
Clarematics is a full-service video agency based around video production. We created a brand that fit our identity at the time, but as we've evolved as a company, we found that original brand didn't quite fit our aspirations anymore. Finding a partner to rebrand your entire company takes a lot of time and effort. Finding Designhill was an incredible lifeline. Designhill offers a money-back guarantee. If we don't like any of the designs, we get all of our money back. The stuff that we ended up with were well beyond what we had been seeing on other creative services platforms. After creating a simple design brief by answering some questions created by Designhill, we posted, and within a few days, we had over 250 entries. Designhill's platform made it easy to communicate with all the potential designers. Eventually, we picked a winner. In addition to a logo, our designer also created a letterhead, business cards, and banners for all of our social media platforms. With Designhill's help, we now have a brand that meets our aspirations. We're ready for the future and everything that it's here to bring.
All right, that was a quick short break that we took. Now let's jump directly into the questions. I see a few more questions in the questions tab, and this question asked by co-string. I'm sorry, I'm not able to pronounce that. I don't want to pronounce that wrong. So the question is, and it has got 4 upvotes, and the question is, referral services would be a community then? Can communities take different forms? So I think he meant to say that, can a referral services form? Can he form a community of referral services?
I mean, I'm not familiar enough with referral services to answer that directly, but let me adjust just slightly. You can build a community almost for any goal or any situation, any group of people that you can reach out to. What I would say is that you need to have a very strong common interest that unites them, something that they want to talk about. If people aren't already talking about it in their spare time or online, you probably can't build a community around it. Second, you have to have a goal of that community that is aligned to your organization. So referrals are really interesting. If you look at what Influitive are doing, a very interesting platform, they get people all onto the same place, and then they give prizes and rewards for referrals and those kind of things. It's a very different kind of community, but it's definitely a kind of community that works for them. And then you can start thinking about what are the most valuable things that members can do within that community. And very often it might be, just giving feedback to you. It might be writing a referral. It might be hopping on a call with a customer. It might be leaving a video testimonial like we've just seen. There's many different things that they can do. So I hope that answers the question. I don't want to drift too far into referrals specifically just because it's not my field of expertise, but I hope something in that helps.
Okay, so now I finally have Ladi's question. So she wanted to ask that she has a clothing business, and she wanted to know that is there a scope for community in the clothing industry?
Yes, absolutely. There must be several already. I think the challenge with clothing is it depends what kind of community you're building. So for example, if you're building a community in the clothing business, are you building it for suppliers and partners to connect and collaborate better with one another? Are you building it for your customers? Are you building it for your employees? There's several different kinds of communities just within that you can be creating. And if you are going to build a community, say for the customers you have, say you sell clothing to the customers you have, then you can start thinking about what is going to make this a completely unique kind of community that doesn't exist anywhere else. What you don't want to be doing is competing against a very large community that already exists. So what makes your community unique? What is the kind of discussions that people can have within your community that they can't have anywhere else? What are the specific unique topics that you can cover? So for example, one of my favorite online communities is called Backpacking Light. And what makes this community unique is that there's a lot of communities out there about backpacking and traveling. What this community is about is having the lightest possible backpack when you travel. And you have all these hiking nerds that spend their time trying to shave a couple of grams and ounces of all the equipment and gear that they have. And it makes it a completely unique kind of community. If you're really into that, if you're a complete hiking nerd, that's the kind of community for you. So if you're building a community around clothing at the moment, how are you going to compete with what's out there at the moment? What's going to make your community completely unique? How does it relate to your brand? So you definitely can do it, but I would spend a lot of time with your audience figuring out what do they want to talk about, what are the things that they care most about, and then trying to create a completely unique experience for them. And there might not be a typical forum-based approach. There might be using social media channels, might be photos. There's so many different ways of doing that. Try and make sure your community is completely unique and really, really resonates with your target audience.
All right. Now, Richard, let's talk about the mistakes that people are making when it comes to community management. So what do you think? What are the, when people start their communities or when they are into that growing phase, what mistakes people usually make that they should definitely avoid, in community management?
So the first one is getting the concept of that community right. So if you're finding that the community feels like a struggle, if you always have to initiate all the activity, if you always have to drag people in to participate, that's okay for maybe the first couple of weeks. But beyond that, you have an issue with the concept. It's not resonating with your audience. You need to adjust quickly. Spend a lot of time researching your audience, surveys, interviews, all those kind of things. Adjust really quickly. But let's say you've got that right. The second part is to make sure you're regularly initiating those discussions, regularly mentoring people to participate, and then slowly adapting your role as well. You shouldn't be doing the same thing today that you were doing 6 months ago. Your role should change over time, so you're focusing on things that have the most value to most of your members. So it can be really tempting to reply to every discussion yourself. It can be really tempting to try and resolve every dispute, and every time that a member gets annoyed, it can be really, really tempting to try and do everything within your power and spend hours trying to make them happy. But that means you can't spend the time helping most of the happy members in your community. So think about doing things like a newsletter, creating content, hosting events and activities, and always expanding the scope of that community. Always making sure the community is delivering more value to more members every single day. To look at the needs your members have, you might begin just by, say, customer support, but they're probably always going to want to be inspired. They're probably going to want emotional support as well. They probably want to know like comparison and product guides and all these kinds of things. So over time, you can gradually expand the value that your community has to your members. Don't just fixate on one specific thing. Always expand the value and make sure your community is always becoming as valuable to your audience as it possibly can. And I think the next thing is to get really, really good at understanding how to engage your audience. As I said before, people get upset all the time, and you cannot make everyone happy. It's just not possible. So at some point, you're going to have to realize that, okay, you need to adjust your work. And so how are you going to resolve with unhappy members quite quickly? How do you make sure you're not spending all your time trying to resolve every minor complaint they have? And often that's just a case of saying, okay, I did my best, but maybe the community isn't right for you. And then moving on to spending your time with the rest of your members. And when it comes to technology as well, the biggest thing and most important thing you can do is make sure that you use a platform where the latest activity is the first thing that members see. People, when they visit a community, they want to know who's new, what and what's new very early on. They also want to know who's popular and what's popular. And if your homepage for that community, no matter what tool you're using, can provide those specific things, then you're going to have a homepage that people can visit all the time, and they can scan and quickly see if there's something there that they want to participate in or not. So if you can get those couple of things right, and it isn't too many things, you're going to find that your community is a lot more successful than what it otherwise would have been.
These are some great tips by Richard here on the best practices that you should follow and the mistakes that you should avoid. Also, Richard, if you can share some, some names of the communities which you think, are doing pretty well, so that people can go and check them out and the best practices that they are following and probably implement some of them for their community. I'm sure not all the practices would work for all, but of course, some of them can definitely work for few. So please go ahead and share few communities that you think which are doing pretty great and that people should check out.
So the first thing I would say, if you go to feverbee.com/communities, you'll find my top 10 list of every platform and by topic, so you can get a whole list of communities that I really like. A couple that I really think do a good job from the brand side, I think Fitbit do a very good job managing their community. I really like what Sephora are doing. Geotab, also another client of mine, I think they're doing really good work in keeping members engaged and active. Outside of that, I think that Kaggle is a pretty exciting online community of data scientists at the moment. I think a lot of these subreddits are quite well run. Science, change my view. By the way, change my view as a subreddit is really worth looking up as creating a unique concept. The Alteryx online community, I think, is another good one. TripAdvisor does a lot of good things. They don't like their badge system, but they do a lot of really interesting things. And of course, I think the best managed online community in the world today is probably the Stack Overflow online community. It just has great management, great gamification, good platform. It's quite a geeky kind of community, and they can be a little bit strict, but there's so many positive things about it in so many channels. So I would check that out as well.
Okay. And now, Richard, a lot of businesses have been affected because of the COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of companies have been shut down for quite some time now, and they lost that connection between them and their customers or their stakeholders. So, what do you think? What impact community building would have or COVID would have on community post this COVID world? Like once the COVID is over, I hope that it gets over soon. But as and when it does, like what do you think? How is it going to impact the community management? Are businesses going to focus more into the community, or how is it going to turn out?
Yeah, I think it's it's obviously being very tragic and devastating what's happened with COVID and the pandemic. From a community perspective, and just leaving everything else aside, what I've seen from the data I've seen is that initially there was a huge surge in activity on most kinds of communities. At the same time, a lot of online communities were having their budgets cut, which created a kind of weird dynamic where you got more people participating, but less resources to support them, which is kind of an issue. I think COVID has also accelerated numerous changes within the space. So more people are visiting by mobile than ever before. I think more people are engaging in discussions than ever before. But I think it's been a blip, but it's still above the trend line of what it used to be. And it also varies tremendously by the topic you're in. So the TomTom online community obviously has had a big collapse, but the Fitbit online community is a lot higher. So it varies depending upon the type of community. What I think we are seeing is that employee online communities are having a surge in activity. I think they're doing a lot of really exciting things. And we're finding more and more often that you don't need a really expensive platform. Often you can hack together something quite simple using tools like Zoom and Slack and Facebook groups and the other free tools that are available out there today, like WordPress or Medium for your blog and content. So I'm seeing a lot more of that as well. So I think overall, employee online communities, a lot more activity. I think most brand communities, somewhat more activity. A big shift to mobile at the moment has been accelerated, I believe. I also think the nature of communities is shifting as well. I think we're moving a little bit away from forum-based platforms and looking at all other kinds of activities and content and ways that people can engage in the community. And I think that's going to be really exciting going forward. So I don't entirely know how it's going to play out. I think those trends are quite interesting, and some of them are quite exciting and very useful for us as well.
Okay, let's see if we have more questions here. All right, so the first question that I see again is from Ko. It's on the top, which has got 2 upvotes, and he says that he has seen people lose sales while minding their community. What tips do you have to achieve balance between community management and the business? How to achieve that balance?
It's an interesting question. I haven't seen that happen so often. I think what you're saying is that so many people are participating in a community that they're not dealing with their customers at the moment. I think the easiest way to solve that is to have someone that's responsible for managing that community. If you've got a salesperson that's trying to participate in the community at the same time, then obviously that's not going to work unless the community is designed purely for lead generation, which happens, but it doesn't happen too often. I think we did a project with Eventbrite that's a little bit like that. But generally, this strikes me as a problem internally, where the policies aren't in place to say who's participating in the community, what the value is to each person that's participating, and when and how to do it. If one of the sales team is participating in a community, you'd want them to know that it's helping their sales. That might be looking for referrals or case studies of people that can support the sales presentations or any of those kind of things. And if that's happening, then it shouldn't be harming their sales figures at all. So it strikes me as a more fundamental core reason behind this. So I'd probably get behind that. I try to first make sure you have someone responsible for managing that community, and then start looking at the sales side. What's the value to each kind of person that might be participating, and how do you make sure that they're getting that value? And very often having clear policies in place tends to work. But it's a harder question because I think there's more context behind this than maybe what I have access to at the moment.
Okay, I hope Ko, you got the answer of your question. Let's jump into the next question that we have, and it is asked by Mithul Desai, and he want to know what are your favorite community platforms that allow both social and work productivity engagement to happen besides Zoom and Slack?
Yeah, I don't know. There's been so much innovation in the last 3 years on internal platforms where colleagues can participate and engage with one another. And the last couple of months, there's been a lot of different platforms that are out there. I haven't had time to research them all yet. Sorry, I can't answer this question. I would love to, but I just don't know at this point.
Okay, so let's jump to the next question, and this is asked by Daniel, and I think it's pretty long. Let me read it out. I have a product. She says that I have a product and I want to create a community. What would be the best way to associate that product with my community? Do I have to make the name of my product very noticeable, or is it better to present it as an associated product but not the one that represents the community? And I think that's a fundamental problem that a lot of people would face when they would be thinking about building a community. And I think that would be a really a great question to answer.
Yeah, I love this question because it's such an important one. I think the community should only be named after your product. Generally, if it's a customer support community or maybe a customer success community. So if you imagine your members are going to go there to ask questions about the product, get answers and leave, then sure, you can name it after that product if you want. If you want people going to that community and creating guides for it, writing documentation for it and sharing it with one another, then sure, maybe that works as well. But what I would be thinking about is how many questions do you get about this product at the moment? So if the product is already there, how many questions are you getting? And if the answer is many, then you're not going to get many questions in that community. So I'd start thinking about those kind of things. If you want to promote the product, if your goal is to, say, generate sales or leads or those kind of things, then it has to be associated with, but you don't want to name it after the product. You want to think about what is the role this product plays in the lives of your audience. So then you can name it after something related to that. I remember there was a community a while ago for data professionals. It's called Backup Heroes, like really community about the profession, talked about the top people in that field, all that kind of things. And it was about the topic, the sector, and it got a lot of people engaged and participating because it wasn't just about the product or the service itself. So you can get a lot more engagement that way, but it won't all be about you. So it depends on what the goal of the community is. If your goal is to generate sales or leads or those kind of things, then find that association. If it's for customer support or documentation or just getting advice about the product, then you can name it after the product instead.
Wonderful. So just want to let you know, guys, that we have very limited time here, and if you have more questions, just put them in the questions tab. So Richard, this question, I personally have this question for you, which is like how to go about what are the right metrics when it comes to analyzing the performance of your community, whether it should be number of posts by members, it should be liked and comments. What are the right metrics that that one should have in place while they are measuring the performance of their community?
So let me just go back again to what we discussed earlier, which is before you even think about that, what are you going to do with this metric if it goes up or down? Because until you know the answer to that question, until you know what you're going to do with the data, there's no point in collecting any data at all. And far too many clients I've worked with get really interested in what metrics to measure without having any idea what they're going to do with that data. So first thing, figure out what would you do with any metric that goes up or down? And after that, then it doesn't, there's different metrics you can use that reflect different things, but a couple of things I think are important here. One is to make sure that whatever you're measuring reflects your performance in the community. So one of my clients at the moment now is measured by the number of visits to that community. The problem with that is that the number of visits depends a lot upon how well the brand is doing. How many customers do they have? How many people are visiting the brand website before they visit the community? So a big part of that metric is outside of their control. So you might want to start looking at things, how many people participate each time they visit, or how many times do people participate compared to the number of people who visit that community. Those kind of ratios tend to do a lot better job of reflecting the performance of the community and the community team than anybody else. So usually here, you might want to track the overall level of activity, but the ratios are far more important for looking at performance. Is the level of activity when a member does visit, is that going up or down? Because that shows whether they're more or less engaged. It's the sense of community that you're generating going up or down, because that shows how good of a job you're doing. So make sure that whatever metrics you use, I don't really mind too much which ones, because there's so many different ones, different situations, but make sure whichever metric you use really reflects your performance. Make sure you have a huge level of control over that, because very often we're measured by things that are outside of our control. We're measured by the total volume of activity or posts or those kind of things, but that often reflects how many questions people have about the product. That often reflects how many people are searching for terms before they even get to that community. Just make sure whatever you're measuring is really within the realm of things that you can actually control from the moment people arrive within that community.
That's some great suggestion here. Okay, so let me take the last question for the day, and then we'll wrap it up. And this question is by Krista, and she wanna know that, and it has got two quotes as well. Her question is: can you list the different sites or resources a community could gather?
I'm not entirely sure what it means by can gather, but I can list different sites or resources that are useful if you're working in the community space. So I think the CMX Hub site, cmxhub.com, fantastic organization. They do a lot of resources for people in the community space. Definitely worth checking out. I think my site, obviously, FeverBee.com. If you want to go there, please do. I think Community Roundtable is really useful. Got a lot of interesting reports on how the industry is doing. Some of the podcasts are interesting. In Before the Lockdown by Erica Cole and Brian, I think is terrific as well. yeah, those are kind of the resources I start with for now. And also start looking at books, Carrie Melissa Jones just has a fantastic new book out, Building Brand Communities. Joanna Bacon has a great book out as well. So yeah, I'd start with those kind of resources, and then you can start learning more skills, and also considering one of the training courses that are out there. I have training courses on my site, other organizations do as well. But to take the community beyond, or take your community to the next level, I think training can really help. So if you can afford it, I would definitely consider doing that as well. So I hope that answered the question. Or if you want to clarify what you mean by could gather, I'm happy to help.
All right, guys, that brings us to the end of this wonderful session with Richard Millington. This was indeed a value-packed session. Although there is a lot more that we could have covered, unfortunately, we have limited time here, and I hope that you guys loved the session. Once again, thank you so much, Richard, for joining us for this session. Would you like to say one last thing to the audience?
Absolutely. If you want to learn more about me and my work, you can follow me at twitter.com/richmillington. Otherwise, just go to FeverBee.com and you can learn more about me, resources, all those kind of things. And just good luck. Good luck building your community. Let me know how it goes. It's one of the most exciting things that you can be doing.
Okay. All right, guys. This is not where it ends. We have a lot more events lined up for you guys. The next event is on role of influencer marketing in today's time. If you have not registered yet, I'm just putting the link of the event in the chat section, and you can register to stay updated for events like these. And you can follow us on our LinkedIn page. You can also give suggestions on the topic that you would want us to cover and the speakers you want us to host. I'm dropping the link of our LinkedIn page as well in the chat section. To watch this session and the other wonderful events, subscribe to our event newsletter or visit our official YouTube channel. All the recordings are over there and you can find them there. I'm also putting the link there in the chat section. For all the business owners who are watching to this session and wish to source high quality designs, you can visit designhill.com. Last but not the least, a quick thing, we have also launched a new DIY creative tool which is called Designhill Studio. It is a tool for designers or non-designers wherein they can create beautiful designs such as business collateral, presentations, social media posts, banners just in few minutes. You can also check that out by going to designhill.com/studio. On that note, I would like to say goodbye to everyone who joined us here today. Thank you so much for joining us. You have been a lovely audience. Stay safe and take care, everyone. Thank you so much.